Hello, and welcome to today's lecture, In This Sign, You Will Conquer. I'm your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we're going to see what's happening in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. So, the west falls apart in 476 CE, where the last Roman Empire in Rome is deposed. But things in the east take a very different turn. So we'll start by setting the scene, figuring out how we got to this place. From there, we're going to investigate Diocletian and his tetrarchy, the kind of group of four leaders, before we move into Constantine, the first Christian emperor, and then start asking, well, was he actually a Christian? And then we'll wrap up with a few concluding thoughts. So let's go ahead and set the scene. The story starts 1,000 years before this, way back in the early Iron Age, where Italy was populated by a wide diversity of groups. The Etruscans, of course, were the most powerful and prosperous of those groups. Rome was founded in 753 BC by Romulus, and over the next 250 years was ruled by a series of 7 kings. And while the first ones were good, the last ones were definitely not. And so in 509 BC, Lucius Junius Brutus overthrows the last of the Roman kings and sets up the Roman Republic. The guiding ideology is there are no kings in Rome, no single rulership. And instead, people elect representatives, and there are always at least 2 at the very top of the political spectrum. Now that works well for a very long time, but by the end of the Republic, the kind of political aristocratic leaders are using Roman armies to fight other Romans. It's broken down into all-out civil war. And eventually, after a series of 3 civil wars, Octavian is able to bring the Roman world under his control, and the Senate proclaims him the Augustus, the revered one. And this is the start of the Roman Empire. And once again, we see things start out really, really well. And for 2 centuries, Rome is incredibly prosperous and incredibly peaceful, kind of on the interior. And people fight around the edges, but nothing much really changes. But in the 3rd century CE, that's when things really do begin to change. And we call this the 3rd century crisis, and it's best exemplified by the greatest name of all the Roman emperors. That, of course, is Pupienus. So in the year of the 6 emperors, in 238 CE, we have 6 different guys hold the emperorship, and Pupienus and Balbinus end up holding it together. Now they're really paranoid of each other. They keep thinking the other one's going to kill them. And so one day, when Pupienus is saying, the Praetorian Guard is coming after us, let me get my German bodyguard and protect us both, Balbinus does not believe him, and while they're arguing about this, the Praetorian Guard does actually break in, kill them both, and install an entirely new emperor. Now, that kind of leads to the end of the Roman Empire in the West. Not exactly that event, but it's a series of events where we see the breakdown of stability in the West. But in the East, in what we'd call late antiquity, we see something very different happen. And that's kind of kicked off with Diocletian and his group of rulers that he calls the tetrarchy. So Diocletian is emperor for 21 years, from 284 to 305 CE. And this is really important that he lasts so long. Well, remember with Augustus, his ability to just survive for 41 years as the emperor is a big part of what makes his whole regime work and makes it last. Now, Diocletian himself was born to a fairly low-status family, but he's able to work his way up through the military, and eventually in 284, he's able to be installed as the emperor. Now, one of the big problems that's going on while Diocletian's in power is that inflation has been going crazy, and that's a result of debasement of coinage. So the silver content of coins is going way, 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 way down, right? To the point where when he takes over, there's barely any silver at all in the coins that they call the denarius, the silver coin. Now Diocletian decides that he's going to address this straight on. And the way that he does that is by putting forth an edict in 301 CE, where he sets the prices for both goods and for services throughout the empire, all right? And he puts this kind of series of prices up all around the empire and says you cannot sell anything for more than this amount, right? You can't sell anything for more than what we see here. And you can see some examples, right? So a math teacher can't charge more than 900 denarii a year per student. A soldier, on average, can't make more than 1,800 per year. A barber is going to make 2 denarii per customer. or maybe less than that, but certainly no more than that. And then we can see the prices of other things, right? You can end up getting a beer for 4 denarii, a glass of wine for 8 denarii, and a tunic, right? Something you'd wear would be like 75. And so these are the kind of maximum prices, and the goal here is to stop this rampant inflation. Now, you can kind of think about what would happen if the government set maximum prices on things. Well, for one, it works in the short term. For about a year or two, it kind of works and inflation stops. In the long run, the market takes back over, right? So by 305, when Diocletian actually retires, nobody's really paying attention to this anymore. And in the beginning, right, the reason people do ever pay attention to it to start with is that the penalty for selling something more than these prices is rather harsh. You're put to death. So one of the other issues, right, is that during the middle of the 3rd century, there's an incredibly rapid turnover in emperors, right? And that leads to a lot of political instability. And you can see just how many emperors we have during the second half of the 3rd century. And another way to kind of look at this is you can look at what I call the death map, right? You can see all the emperors, where they died, and whether they died of natural causes, the ones in blue, the few in blue, or unnatural causes, right? Whether they were killed. And those are all the ones in black. And you can see that only like 3 out of like 20-something emperors in Rome ends up dying of natural causes. So Diocletian's got to find a way to settle things down. And his solution is to divide the empire into kind of 4 different quadrants, right? And each of the 4 kind of rulers is going to take their own kind of region and more or less have this kind of autonomous territory that they rule. Now, politically, the way this is going to work is that Diocletian appoints a kind of co-emperor, this guy Maximian, all right? And they're known as the Augusti, and that's kind of the highest level of emperorship. And they each have their own region. Diocletian is out in the east, Maximian is in the west. And then working right under those guys, Diocletian appoints 2 Caesars, all right? These are like, think of them as like the vice presidents, all right? And Galerius is the Caesar out in the east, and Constantius is the Caesar out in the west. And the way that this is supposed to work is that the Augusti will rule for 20 years, they will then retire, and afterwards the Caesars will elevate to Augusti, and then those new Augusti will appoint new Caesars. And therefore, by knowing what the chain of succession will be, ideally this instability will kind of be brought to a close. Now, this group of 4 rulers Diocletian calls the tetrarchy, right? That's still the name that we use for them today. Literally means in Greek, the 4 rulers. And one of the reasons we're using Greek right now is because Diocletian is out in the east. And we'll see that as Rome moves out east, they adopt this kind of Greek language, and by the time Constantine moves the capital to Constantinople, that's really the predominant language of the empire. So we can see the tetrarchs displayed here. This is a statue made of porphyry, an Egyptian sort of kind of marble, and it shows all 4 of the tetrarchs embracing each other, showing unity at the top of the Roman political spectrum. You can also kind of see like how much Roman sculptural techniques have changed, right? No longer does this look like the idealized Augustus. All of a sudden we have kind of little alien-looking emperors with kind of beady little eyes. So if you want to go see this, again, go to San Marco Cathedral in Venice and look at the kind of corner in the lower left-hand side, and you'll see the statue stuck right in there. Now, one of the amazing things is that this kind of works, at least for one generation. In 305 CE, Diocletian and his other Augustus, they retire, right? We haven't gotten this in a long, long time, right? And so Diocletian retires, and he retires to this palace that he's got in modern-day Croatia in the city of Split. So he has this massive palace built for himself, and this is where he goes to kind of live out the rest of his days. It's really a nice place. And one of the amazing things is that we've still got his retirement palace. So you can go to the city of Split today. And one of the things that happens is as populations collapsed in the medieval period, the entire medieval population of the city of Split is living inside Diocletian's palace, right? the population of an entire city inside one emperor's palace. And you can go there today, you can see the walls of Diocletian, you can walk around where the palace is, and you can go like have a coffee at a cafe that's built right into Diocletian's palace. So Diocletian does his best to kind of stabilize the empire with things like his price edict and this political system where you have two Augusti, two Caesars, and then they slowly replace each other so that everybody knows the chain of succession. So after Diocletian retires, here's our new setup, right? We've got Galerius as the new Augustus in the east, Constantius as the new Augustus in the west, and then they appoint Maximinus Daia in the east as the Caesar, and a guy by the name of Constantine, Constantius' son, in the west. Now this works well for all of about a year. And even though Constantius is able to win some victories over the kind of northern British tribes to begin with, he ends up dying very, very quickly. And in his kind of will, right, or before he dies, he says he wants his son to be elevated as the new Augustus. And his son, of course, is the Constantine. And Constantine's original area of power was all the way up in Britain. And so this is weird to think of, right? The Roman Emperor Constantine, who rules in Rome and eventually moves to Constantinople, he gets his start in the kind of far north of England. He's actually first kind of situated at the site of Eboracum, which is modern-day York. And if you go to the cathedral there, it's an amazing cathedral. You can still see the statue of Constantine right outside its walls. Now, this is the way that kind of Diocletian had broken up the empire, right? So we've got one group here way out in the east. We've got another area in Pannonia and Moesia. We've got Italia in North Africa. And then we've got Gaul and we've got Britain. And you can think back to what ends up happening with the triumvirate, right? With the second triumvirate. Once they defeat the senators, what happens? They break up the empire. Octavian takes the west. Antony takes the east, and Lepidus takes the south, right? He takes North Africa, little tiny spot. Nobody cares about Lepidus. But anyway, this lasts for all of a couple of years, and then they're fighting with each other, and it ends up being Octavian who's able to kind of reunite everything. Well, we see something similar happen here. Diocletian breaks it up, and for as long as Diocletian's alive, the process works, but as soon as he dies, the kind of remaining Augustan Caesars start fighting with each other. And so Constantine moves out of Britain and starts moving south into Gaul and then into the Italian peninsula. And eventually he shows up outside the walls of Rome with his army. And there he's ready to do battle with Maxentius, right? Who ends up being another one of the leaders who's ruling in Rome at the time. And the way the story goes is that the night before the battle, Constantine falls asleep. And in his sleep, he sees a dream, right? And it's kind of a bright light. And he sees in this light a symbol. And it ends up being kind of a cross with a P sticking out of it. And this is more or less what we call the chi rho, right? These are two Greek letters, the chi being the X and the rho being the P. But they're not pronounced that way, right? The chi is the ch, and the rho is the ro, right? And when you put them together, you get the first two letters of the word Christos, the first two letters of Christ. And so this had been a way that Christians were identifying each other for a while, but now Constantine sees it in his dream. And along with that symbol, he hears a voice, right? The voice of God, which I imagine is a resounding baritone, and the voice says, "In hoc signo vinces," because Constantine's God, of course, is speaking in Latin. And what "in hoc signo vinces" means is, in this sign, you will conquer. And so when Constantine wakes up the next day, he gets in front of his troops, and he tells them about the dream. And he tells every one of them to paint this symbol on their shields and on their armor. And you can see Constantine's troops all over the place here with the chi rho on the shields and kind of leading Christ out before them into battle. And at that battle, at the site of the Milvian Bridge, which still exists in Rome today, right? You can go to the Milvian Bridge right outside of Rome. In 312 CE, Constantine is able to defeat Maxentius and take over control of the Western Roman Empire. So Constantine then starts out east, right? So now he's got all this area here, he's conquered Italy, and there's no point to stopping there. He's going to continue moving eastward over into the area of the other Augustan Caesars. And in 324 CE, he's able to defeat Licinius, the last of the kind of Augusti, and therefore reunite the entire Roman Empire. And what he does then after that defeat is 6 years later, he ends up moving the capital of this new reunified empire from Rome to the city of Constantinople. Names it after himself, obviously. Now, this is on the previous city of Byzantium, and that's where we get our word Byzantine Empire later on, because it's based kind of on that city. And it's on the kind of underneath the modern city of Istanbul. And so if you go to Istanbul today, you can see the kind of remains of Roman Constantinople. And this is kind of what it would have looked like in Roman antiquity, all right? So you can see the big hippodrome in the center, you can see the Roman kind of style housing, the public buildings right in the center, the horologium in the plaza over there. And in 330, Constantine moves the capital to this site. And if you go there, right, you can still see the ancient Roman walls. These kind of post-date Constantine by just a little. They're the walls of Theodosius, so they're the late 4th century CE, but they're very, very Roman in nature. And if you ever see these kind of walls, you'll see it at Split as well, where you get the kind of white stone interspersed with the red brick, and it's kind of layer by layer by layer. You can bet your last dollar that you are looking at a late Roman building. And when you get into the actual city of Istanbul, you can see some of the other remnants. So this is the site of the ancient hippodrome, and it's still kind of there, right? You can't actually, there's no hippodrome still standing, but the space itself is still this big open public space. And you can see these large tall monuments right here, not the mosque behind it, but the large tall monuments, the obelisk there and this thing here, and this would have stood along the spina, all right? And the spina is the word for spine. And you can kind of see it, if we look back here, right, it's the thing that would have gone down the center of the hippodrome, and that's where they would have had their chariot races. You can also see the Roman cisterns that date to this period. So you can still go underneath the modern city of Istanbul, and this is what greets you, right? A whole hall of columns with water filled up to a right about here so that the people of Constantinople could have something to drink. So we know Constantine is kind of the first Christian emperor, but it's really something that's debated as to whether he was actually really in practice a Christian. Now, one of the things that we know is that his mom was said to be a Christian. So Helena, right, Saint Helena, she ends up being kind of one of the early Christians. And her son Constantine ends up doing some things that are very Christian and some other things that are maybe not so much Christian. So we heard the story, right, at the Milvian Bridge of painting the Chi Rho on the shields. And shortly after that victory, he ends up signing the Edict of Milan. And what this does is this ends up legalizing Christianity throughout the empire. Now, this isn't the same as saying it's the new state religion, all right? So it's not that everybody has to be Christian now. Rather, it's saying that Christianity is okay. And this is a big deal because it's not too much kind of prior to Constantine that we had Diocletian using the Christians as a scapegoat for the 3rd century crisis and persecuting quite a large number of them. One of the other things that we see about a decade later is Constantine called together the Council of Nicaea. And what they're doing at this council is they're trying to figure out the kind of doctrine of early Christianity. And so one of the big debates people were having is basically how divine Christ was, right? How divine was Jesus? We know God's God, right? But they're like, okay, this guy's like part man, part God. Is it like a 50-50? Is he all God or all man or all of it together? And at the Council of Nicaea, they're trying to settle this issue so that there's no infighting in the early church. And what they come away with saying is that, yes, Jesus is indeed divine. And as the story goes, on his deathbed in 337 CE, Constantine is baptized. And this was kind of a common practice for the day. The idea was that the baptism would wash away your sins, and so it kind of made sense to be baptized at the end of your life so that anything you had done, well, it kind of washed that away. And so as the story goes, he's baptized on his deathbed, but that story, well, it comes from like a later Christian writer. And so we have to wonder, is that something that actually happened, or is that something that the Christian writer says happened? And there's some evidence that he wasn't totally Christian, right? So if you look in Rome, Constantine still supports many of the kind of pagan temples, right? He still gives money to have those things kind of refurbished. Moreover, he builds what you're looking at here. And this is the Arch of Constantine. And as you can see by this thing over here, it's right outside the Roman Colosseum. And Constantine sets this up after his victory at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in order to commemorate that victory. And when he does, a lot of the iconography over here is kind of classical Roman religion. So you have kind of depictions of the Roman goddess of victory. You have depictions of Apollo and Artemis. These different kinds of classic Roman gods end up showing up on the triumphal arch. And so it's still something debated as to how Christian Constantine was, but any way you slice it, right, this is the first time that Christianity moves from kind of an underground religion to something fairly major in the Roman world. So a couple concluding thoughts, right? Diocletian really makes a push to change things drastically in order to preserve the Roman Empire. And so he splits up Rome, he comes up with this kind of political system of Gusti and Caesars, and the goal is to preserve what's going on, preserve this empire for centuries to come. And it kind of half works. So in the East, especially after Constantine moves the capital over there, the East thrives. It's kind of becoming this new Christian Roman Empire centered on the site of Constantinople. In the West, however, well, the West does not thrive, right? The West kind of ends up dying out in large part because many of these barbarian tribes see how strong the East is. They continue to push west. They meet less resistance in Rome. And in that 5th century, right, Rome is sacked 3 different times, eventually for good. And again, regardless of whether Constantine was a Christian emperor or not, this is the first time that Christianity really makes it onto the big stage. It's legalized empire-wide, and at least there are rumors that the emperor himself is Christian. And within the next kind of 5 decades, that ends up becoming the state religion, right? So it moves from something that's okay to something that everybody in Rome should be a Christian. And that's what happens after Constantine saw that light in the sky and heard that voice saying, "In this sign you will conquer."